Welcome to Retire Smart with David Brooks. I'm Chip Maxwell. David, as always, so much to get to. Estate planning attorney Colin Kastrick's going to join us today. Let's start with the big picture, as we usually do. Let's go global, David. I want to ask you about two things. I think there's a thread of continuity here. Let me get your take on this. Two things happening on opposite sides of the globe. In the United Kingdom, we have a new British Prime Minister. Liz Truss seems to be more conservative than her predecessor, Boris Johnson. Favors tax cuts, wants to reduce social spending. Then on the other side of the globe, in Chile, voters were presented with a big shove to the left in their national constitution. There was going to be national health care. Addressing climate change was going to be made a constitutional requirement. I don't even know what that means. It sounds like blank check for government spending on whatever. But the point is, the voters in Chile rejected that measure. David, our portfolios here in Nebraska and Iowa and in the Midwest, they are affected by global events. I think this is good news, is it not?
Absolutely. So we're seeing an uprising, and it's not politically from left to right, right? The pendulum always swings, and we certainly seem to have swung a little left of center around the globe for sure in the last several years. And there's these movements, exactly, blank check spending, where you come in with the ESG investing or climate change initiatives when no one really knows what those initiatives really are. All modeling from climate change from the last 60 years has been inaccurate, right, to say the least. So 60 years ago, what they anticipate 20 years in the future was wrong, and 50 years ago and rolling. They've never been right. Yet now they want to constitutionally, in some countries, mandate that they spend money for a future that they have no idea the certainty on. So this is a good news in that it gets people a little bit more conservative on the spending of their government, and Chile's a great example of that. And you're right, in the UK, now she does spend money. She is a spender. Boris Johnson, basically, he was a somewhat conservative. You know, he was a friend to Trump when he got elected, et cetera. But he moved very quickly back to the middle ground and overspent and lost the confidence of his own party. Now, the UK is a very different system, you know, the different parties, and you have the Labour Party, et cetera, and the Conservative Party. But they have multiple parties, and so they have to form these coalitions to actually get somebody to come forward and become the prime minister. But, yes, she does not like overspending. She is a little bit more open to negotiating, though, with the other parts of the euro than Boris was on certain issues. We'll see where it lands. But, yeah, I do believe it was good news in that the voters are saying, look, we're just tired of you guys just spending money with no rhyme or reason. And we're seeing this not only here, but you're seeing it in state elections, which we can talk about as well, or new bills being pushed across the board. And speaking of new bills, here in Nebraska, Chip, we got a couple important issues will be on the ballot this year for the voters to decide on.
Let's bring it back home. We just found out this week that there are going to be two items on our ballot in the fall. One is voter ID, and ever since I've known you, you've been an advocate for voter ID. The other one would be a minimum wage increase, David, that would be stair-stepped up over the next 3 years, basically. It would go from $9 to $15 by January of 2026. I know that theoretically that's not your cup of tea, but maybe it's no harm, no foul in this case.
Well, okay, so let's tackle those issues one at a time.
Yep.
One, voter ID, absolutely. I'm a massive proponent for this. I've been screaming since I got here. I mean, you and I talked about it. The very first time when I moved to Nebraska over 5 years ago, the first time I walked in to vote, I'm like, what do you mean you don't need my ID?
Right,
It literally blew me away. I remember talking to you on the radio about that. I was like, I could not fathom a state in the Midwest would let you vote. Just walk up, yeah, this is my address. And let you vote. I mean, and the idea that, there's no such thing as voter fraud is ludicrous, especially the data we have now from the last couple of election cycles. But anyway, I don't want to digress. So, yeah, I'm very grateful that it's on there, and over 80% of voters surveyed support the measure. So I think that passes with flying colors. The other issue is the minimum wage. And again, no harm, no foul. To your point, I would just tell you, I don't think anybody works for minimum wage very rarely, or not many people are going to be working for minimum wage here in the state of Nebraska. I mean, you can go to Taco Bell, Come and Go, Casey's, a lot of these entry-level jobs are starting wages out at 15 plus an hour today, plus benefits, because that's what the market says they have to pay. Yet
Target in some places have signs that say $15 an hour to start.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so the free market here in Nebraska drives wages up, so it's almost irrelevant. So if they want to scale the minimum wage up, and that makes people feel good, so be it. I will tell you, economically, though, when you raise minimum wages, you simply hurt the lowest income people the most, and there's factual data proving this, because you're going to create inflationary pricing pressures. The cost of labor to produce goods and services goes up. Therefore, you have to pay more for those goods and services at the lower end, fast food restaurants in particular.
Well, speaking of fast food restaurants, all right, let's take it up a notch, David. Let's up the ante here. Let's go to California. California, we were just talking about California's hemorrhaging people. It's hemorrhaging business. Now it's saying no gas-powered cars, in another decade or so. And here's the latest. Here's the headline. This is from the Wall Street Journal. California governor signs fast food bill opening way to higher wages. Well, yeah, it opens the way to higher wages, David. But we're talking about now in California, there's going to be a state panel which will dictate wages to fast food industries, and the consensus right now from the news story seems to be they're looking at $22 an hour. David, I love drawing on your experience. You broke into the adult working world as an owner of pizza restaurants. You've been there. You've done that. You've told us I had to price cheese and other ingredients, for our business. And of course, labor is the number one expense for a small business. This could be catastrophic to these restaurants.
You'll crush thousands and thousands of businesses will close based on this law, literally. Mom and pop restaurants, or even those that paid big dollars, $40,000, $50,000, $100,000 for the franchise rights of a national chain like a burger joint or what have you, or a taco place. They pay these big franchise fees up because there's a system, but these systems run on a pretty thin margin. The average restaurant runs on margins less than 12 to 14% profit. So there's not a lot of wiggle room here. And if you increase wages, let's just say they're paying in California $15 an hour now. You increase those wages by 50%, basically $7 an hour increase.
Yeah, that's what it would be.
Here's the easy way to math, right? The national minimum wage is very easy to gauge what a Happy Meal costs, right? When you drive through the drive-thru and just get a take, right? So when I started in the workforce, minimum wage was $3.05 an hour. All right, so I'm dating myself a little bit here. But you know what? You could go through McDonald's and get a quarter pounder of meal, Coke, fries, and the quarter pounder for $2.99 or less. It was less than the minimum wage. Today, the average minimum wage across the country is around $9. Federally, it's I think still $7.25. But most states have, but the average is somewhere around $9. Well, go. What does a meal cost if you drive through?
That's right about where you are now for a combo meal.
Well, so you're, in California, that meal is going to cost you $22. I mean, that's just, so if you have a family of 4, or like you, 7 kids, if you had them all in the minivan, I know they're a little grown, but can you imagine trying to pick up 9 of those meals? You're going to have to break out a C note just to get through the drive-thru.
That used to be the safety valve, a fast food restaurant. Not anymore, the way things
And so this will crush small business owners, which is what I really think it's designed to do. Again, those that lobby for this, are those that are big business friendly. They want the state to control everything, and then eventually they'll, what even scarier here, Chip, is this is run by a panel of unelected officials that just arbitrarily. You know what? I think it's going to be $28 next year. We're going to change our mind.
Oh, yeah. It's arbitrary. The panel can do whatever it wants.
It's insanity at its finest here. And so there is a guy quoted in the article. I have to find his name. I apologize. But he is one of the, I think his name is Mr. Flynn, Greg Flynn. He owns a large restaurant group, Flynn Restaurants, it's called, Flynn Restaurant Group, that own restaurants, over 105 restaurants in California. He operates in over 40 states, I believe, and a massive supporter of Gavin Newsom. So politically aligns with him.
Yeah, he's a Newsom donor.
Yeah, a donor, supported him. Well, in California, that makes business sense to donate to the Democratic Party. I mean, that's just somebody hedging their bets for sure. But he cannot believe that they put this law in place, and his 105 restaurants are going to be in trouble. You cannot increase the cost of labor in a recessionary period at that on top of this. So increased taxes are going through in California now, increased in wages going to be forced onto these small business owners, and this is going to be bad news for their economy. California was once the 5th wealthiest economy in the world. Pride and joy of all the states here in the United States, and it is sadly not that anymore and will not be for some time unless they change their voting ways.
Well, we'll keep an eye on that one for you, friends. In the meanwhile, David, I'm going to give you about a minute for this one because I'm somewhat confused. CNBC headline says the rising unemployment rate was, quote, the best news, end quote, in the August jobs report, according to one leading economist. So we got a decent jobs number for the month of August. The unemployment rate ticked up a bit, but the experts are saying that's good news. Explain that for us, David.
Well, more people are coming back into the labor force. As we said, that would have to happen after all the free money ran out, right? So there's a higher participation rate, and so more people are looking. Therefore, we have to count them because we don't count people that aren't looking. How crazy our stats are. But anyway, so more people are looking. Therefore, it's going to make the percentage of unemployed tick up. But that is, in eventuality, good news is more people are coming back to the labor force. That could help widen the labor pool, which might ease some of the wage pressures we were just talking about. If more people are looking, they might be willing to take a slightly less in pay to do the same job as they're going to need dollars. So the report is kind of one of these, it's actually not the worst news, basically simply because the participation rate is widening out. And so that's good news. People are coming back to the workforce.
Well, we have economic indicators that look good. Some are troubling. This is the time for you to get a complimentary report card. Let us look at your entire financial situation. Maybe you're in good shape. Maybe you need to make a few changes. 402-369-7777. No charge, no obligation. Complimentary financial report card. 402-369-7777. Up next, it is vital that your estate plan is properly integrated with your overall retirement plan, especially where taxes are concerned. That's why we periodically visit with estate planning. Welcome back to Retire Smart with David Brooks. I'm Chip Maxwell. The A in a SMART plan stands for Advanced Planning for all aspects of your retirement. That includes how your loved ones will be taken care of after you're gone. Estate planning is a key part of your retirement plan. Our special guest helps us make sure our clients have the most advantageous estate plan. David, please introduce our special guest.
Yeah, thank you, Chip. And once again, back in the studio, we have our great friend, attorney and estate planning extraordinaire, Mr. Colin Kastrick. Colin, thank you so much for taking time to stop by this week.
Yeah, thanks for having me, David.
Absolutely. So I want to jump right in because there's a lot of things I want to talk about. Number one, our legislative body at least made some positive movement when it comes to regard of an inheritance tax here. I still think we shouldn't have it. We're one of only, I believe, 6 states still with an inheritance tax here in the lovely state of Nebraska. But we did change the rules a bit. We used to only be able to exempt about $40,000 when we inherited money from mom, dad, et cetera, brother, sister, whoever it might be. That number has now been moved all the way up to $100,000 before we would have to pay the inheritance tax, correct?
Yep, for what we call direct descendants, so kids, brothers, sisters, people like that.
So I always tell that it's kind of like arm's length, right? Your brother and sister left and right, your mom and dad above you, your kids. Does that includes grandkids too, correct?
Yep, as long as they're down the line, you think about that.
Descendants down the line, right?
Yep, straight down the line.
All right. So then we also have 2 other rates, which Nebraska, if you don't know, charges inheritance tax. And this is a problem, by the way, for a lot of what we call cohabitators, right? People have been in a long-term relationship, live together in the same home, but for one reason or the other, they either the previous spouse was deceased or they got divorced, and they just did not want to get married. And we understand that, is common today. But a lot of times they don't realize they want to take care of that other person, their significant other, and they leave money to them. They would pay an 18% inheritance tax here in Nebraska. Now, the good news is that number's creeping down, but it's still a pretty big penalty. It's still 15% in that situation, right?
Yeah, exactly. And we talk about that a lot is, sometimes we say, hey, it might be time to get married. But yeah, it's an expensive. So you only get a $25,000 exemption too. So the first 25 isn't counted. But yeah, 15% at every dollar over that.
And I try to explain to people, like, let's just say you have $500,000 in an IRA, a retirement account. Unfortunately, you pass away, and you leave it to your significant other, but this person is not legally married to you. That is a taxable account, number one. Number two, now you don't have to pay income tax to take money out, federally and state, but now you have to pay the state inheritance tax, and that is due within a year, or basically 9 months, right, after death?
So in Nebraska, it's a year. Yeah, but
So-
then it's a 14% interest rate if you don't pay it.
Wow, penalty 14%. So they're going to have to pay 15% now going forward. That's better than 18%. But to take that money out, right, that's a taxable distribution. So now you're going to pay federal tax and state tax another 6.84% on the income tax for the state of Nebraska. So they're going to clean up on IRAs. So folks, listen. If you're cohabitating or your significant other and you're not married to him and that's who you plan on leaving assets, you really need to have a conversation with Colin, and we'll give you the opportunity to do that at the end of this segment. But now let's talk about, there are some other changes within the system. So now we have the $100,000 limit, which is a big relief. So in other words, the 1% tax, which is on everybody. Basically, the first $100,000, and it's not for the estate; it's per beneficiary. They get the $100,000 to exempt, right? So if I have $500,000 in my IRA and I have two kids, I leave them each $250,000 of that account. They both get to exempt the first $100,000, and the $150,000 that would be left, they would have to pay a 1% inheritance tax, right?
Yep, that's how it works.
Okay. Now, kids under 21 minors used to get this tax as well. That has been removed finally as well, right? So now if a minor child, kid or grandkid inherits these dollars or the accounts, they do not have to pay the inheritance tax here in the state of Nebraska, right?
Yep, absolutely.
So, again, at least there was some positive movement this year in the legislature on these issues. Why not just rip that Band-Aid off? They're not collecting that much revenue on these taxes, by the way, and they're driving people across the border. But anyway, that's a story for another day. So if you would like to learn more about these topics, Colin actually teaches, we call it Estate Planning 101, where he covers this and a myriad of other topics in about an hour-long class with one of our advisor, Mike Schudel, who actually happens to have a law degree as well. And they go pretty in-depth. And we have some of those classes coming up here in just a couple of weeks. So if you would like to get registered for that, we'll give you the opportunity to do so here at the end of the segment, or at the end of the show today. So, Colin, if you don't mind, I want to pivot to something that's, well, we've gotten a lot of traction because you and I have talked about this for the last couple of years on the radio, and it's Medicaid planning. And folks, I'm not talking about Medicare. We talk about Medicare a lot because that's how you access health care once you're 65. Medicaid, all right, just remember, Medicare is to care for the elderly. Medicaid is typically to aid the poor, right? That's how you can remember the differences there. But Medicaid planning is if, unfortunately, you are going to be needing health care services over and above what you can receive at home, and you may be looking to enter into a facility, assisted living, indigent care, memory care, whatever it may be, you're going to have to pay for those services, right, until you spend down your entire asset flow, and there's a 5-year look back. But with proper Medicaid planning, someone like Colin can help you save a lot of assets that could eventually pass on to the other beneficiaries. So talk about what that looks like, because we're doing this right now, folks, for my mother. You've heard me talk on this show. My mom's husband passed away earlier this year, about 7 months ago, and my mom, unfortunately, has dementia now and is going into facility, and we're in the middle of that process, and she doesn't have a great deal of assets, but what she does, we can protect even at this late stage of the game.
Yeah, so if you do nothing else, what the state says is Medicaid, again, will start paying for care once you get down to $4,000. So if you've got $200,000, you got to spend $196,000 down. And a lot of people, that's what they think. They think, oh, I got to spend it down. And that's what that's the advice they're given, and it's unfortunate. There are all kinds of ways you can do it. We have two kind of segments of Medicaid planning. And so we call one the proactive planning. So if you have time, if you think, hey, I'm doing fine now, but in 5 years, who knows what's going to happen? And we do a lot of gifting at that point. So if you gift assets and you make it 5 years before you need state aid, those assets are off the table. They're not going to call them back. They're safe. So that's the first way we do it. If we have time, we do this a lot of times for farmers and ranchers who want to give away some of the farm. There's a few exemptions there, but that's the boilerplate of it is we're going to give it away to the kids. And if the kids aren't necessarily trustworthy, we might give it to them in a trust that provides the assets for them, but doesn't just give it to them outright.
And yeah, so basically, I don't want to say you're controlling from the grave, but you can kind of steer and give a lot of guidance as to what can happen with those assets.
And some people do need it, though. Some kids need it.
No,
if
absolutely.
I give my kid a $1 million farm that's been in the family for 100 years, I expect that he's not going to sell it. If I think he's going to sell it, let him benefit from the income, but not let him sell it. Things like that. And so that's the first step, is that proactive planning, and we do that with a lot of clients. But some people, it's too late for them. They either don't have 5 years, or they're going in the home tomorrow, or mom or dad are already in the home. And so what we do then is we call it crisis planning. And so what that is using a bunch of different tools. There's a bunch of different buckets. So we get these buckets to fill. So we can have so much in this bucket, so much in this bucket, so much in this bucket, that the state says you can have, and they don't care about it. It's an exempt asset. And so what we do is we move those buckets and fill them up, and usually we're saving 50 to 60% of the estate. So like I said, if you have $200,000, we're saving $120,000 of that estate for the kids. And a lot of times that's people's goals. Hey, I don't mind paying a little bit, but I want to pay everything down to this home and leave nothing for my kids. There's all kinds of rules and limitations that we can work with, and to really, really protect that estate.
I want to point out something really important you said. It's not only that we can do this crisis planning, like my mom right now, we are literally making application this week for the place where we're going to ultimately end up having her stay. And, we are in crisis mode planning on that, because this came about very suddenly this year, that her medical condition, et cetera. And so this is something we're dealing with. But you also mentioned someone who's already in the facility. We can still protect and plan and protect some of the assets that may be in that person's name, but they need to take action now before they continue to spend down. And let's face it, once you're in a facility, you're on the low end, $3,500 a month, and you could be up to $14,000 a month in expenditures pretty quickly, depending on the level of care and the facility chosen. So if somebody wants to kind of look at what that is, and they're already in a home, how do they go about doing that? What's step one?
Well, it's just really reaching out to a professional like myself, or another attorney who really knows what they're doing in there, and sitting down usually with the kids and going over assets. And the biggest thing too is we got to have most homes will work with you if you talk to them. They won't admit that right up front, but eventually they'll come and say, yes, as long as you private pay so much, we'll take Medicaid, we'll keep you in the same room, things like that. But it's really just reaching out to somebody as soon as possible, because every month that they sit in there is another month of you said $14,000 that they lost.
Yeah, you can spend those assets pretty quickly down. So this planning can happen no matter what stage somebody is at. But if you've got some assets that need protecting, then you need to actually take action. And of course, if you'd like to do that, you can learn more about that at the Estate Planning 101 class coming up here in just a couple of weeks at the Midwest Learning Center. And again, I'll get the dates hopefully at the end of the show for you. I don't have the times in front of me, but Colin will most likely be there at the event teaching, etc. And then Colin also partners with one of the other members on our team, Michael Luna, and our Smart Protection team, to help facilitate some of this Medicaid planning. And there's some unique things that you can do when partnering with him to really protect those assets. So any other final thoughts on this topic while we're on it today, Colin?
Yeah, again, like I said, it's just aligning yourself with a professional who knows what they're doing. So many times people come in and they've talked to attorneys, and the attorney said, spend your money down. And that's because it's such a niche area that they just don't know. And it's something you got to really find yourself a professional in this area. And like you said, Michael Luna's great at it. Him and I have been working together for years doing this kind of stuff. And right now we've got a 100% success rate of getting people qualified.
I cannot tell you how often we've heard just what you just said. They go to their family attorney, someone who kind of just drew up, maybe did their basic will, but maybe helped them with their marriage or their real estate closing, a very generalist, if you will, and doesn't understand the specifics of the area we're talking about. And then just, you got to spend it down. There's nothing you can do. Folks, you don't know what you don't know. You need to get competent and professional advice in each area that you're seeking. That's what we try to bring to you each week on the show. So if you'd like to get in touch with Colin and have a complimentary, he will not charge you, we'll wring his neck, for a complimentary consultation to speak with Colin Kastrick, you just give us a call now at 402-369-7777. Again, 402-369-7777. And you can also get registered for the upcoming estate planning class. Well, we're out of time for this segment. Colin, thank you so much for stopping by this week. We're look forward to having you back on the show here real soon.
Yeah, sounds like a plan.
All right. Chip, what do we got next?
Up next, you have questions. David Brooks has answers. We reach into the mailbag next on Retire Smart with David Brooks. Welcome back to Retire Smart with David Brooks. I'm Chip Maxwell. Into the mailbag we go. Eliana says, my husband and I are in our early 60s. Let me do that again, Jerry. My husband and I are in our early 60s and plan to retire at 65. A friend shared with me a finding in a study by Fidelity Investments, estimating that a 65-year-old couple retiring now will need $300,000 for healthcare expenses in retirement. That did not include the cost of long-term care. 300 grand is about a third of what we have saved for retirement. This has us worried. Do you agree with Fidelity's? Let me do that again, Jerry. Do you agree with Fidelity's assessment? David, how do you see it?
Absolutely. It's actually higher than that now. So that study's been updated about 335 already in the most recent study. And they do this study every year. And some people get shocked by this. But listen, statistically speaking, a married couple, okay, that gets to 65, they're going to be around for 20 to 25 years on average, okay? Our life expectancy is longer, all right? It's not our average life expectancy, which is in the high 70s today, because that includes mortality pre-65, right? Once you're 65, most people are surprised to find out the mortality tables actually push men living 18 to 23 years and women typically 21 to 28 years longer.
If you've made it that far, you're probably going to keep going.
And married people, in fact, actually live longer than single people. This is a statistical fact as well. So if your healthcare, Chip, just put those two together, right? Combine those two together. That's about 45 years of healthcare if it were one individual stretched out both those lives. And if you were to spend, I don't know, $4,000 to $6,000 a year on that healthcare, you can very easily see these numbers, and that's a low number, right? A couple $100 a month. So yes, that is reality, and a lot of people are not facing that reality or planning for it. Now, there's actually another financial show on this in this area right here in Omaha, another financial advisor. We talked about this, I don't know, a year or two ago, and he, I guess, was listening to our show and then laughed and made fun of us for the study we cited that none of my clients would pay that. And this particular individual is selling everybody that walks in his door what's called a Medicare Advantage plan. Aha, they don't have to pay anything. And that's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. Folks, you've got to understand how Medicare works. We briefly with Colin earlier talked about Medicare and Medicare. Medicare is your health care post 65, right? And there are 4 major components to it, Chip, A, B, C, and D. We actually have a class for this called the ABCs of Medicare.
It's this week.
It's actually this week. That's right. And this is led by one of our financial advisors, Dustin Galvin, that will explain all those parts so you can understand what your out-of-pocket exposure is and what options there are to protect you. And there are options to try and mitigate those costs down, but it's only if you proactively take care and make decisions before it's too late. So I highly encourage people to sign up for that class.
Well, since we mentioned it, that's Wednesday, September 14th, or Thursday, September 15th. It's the same class, either night. Pick your night. 6:30 p.m. It's right here at Retire Smart in our Midwest Learning Center. That's the ABCs of Medicare, 402-369-7777. We'll mention it again before we're done today, but they fill up. You may not want to wait to the end of the show to call 402-369-7777. So for Eliana and her husband, David, yes, they should be on alert. There are things they can do, but they got to get moving on it. Don't just remain on autopilot and get blitzed.
Well, she had mentioned she's in her early 60s. So if you're eligible, if you have an HSA, it's a health savings account available at work, I would highly encourage you to max fund those every year between now and 65 because you can no longer put money into that. It's the only triple tax-free account left in America. But you can't fund it 6 months prior to turning on Medicare Part B. So there's some rules you got to follow. But again, great question, and yes, you would be a candidate to get to that class.
There's a question here from Ed, David, and to the casual listener might think, well, isn't that redundant? Didn't they just talk about that? But let's listen carefully and parse this. Ed says, I turn 65 next year, and I saw a stat that got my attention. Someone turning 65 today has an almost 70% chance of needing long-term care. Long-term care is not cheap. Does your smart plan process include provision for long-term care? Well, I know, David, that a holistic, comprehensive plan like a smart plan certainly does, but maybe you should begin your answer by explaining there is a difference between long-term care and health care that we were just talking about before.
So what I like is the questions we've been getting as of late are from people that have obviously been listening for a while, and
True.
That really puts a smile on my face. And so I love that people have been getting educated and then are going out there and kind of searching and looking for answers. And so, Ed, first off, to answer Chip's question, yes. To answer your question, yes, we absolutely address it in the SMART plan. It's part of the A for advanced planning, and it's part of the M. So there's a couple different ways we have to tackle this, but it is absolutely separate from your regular health care, which is your Medicare, supplemental policies, original Medicare A and B or Part D, or even a Medicare Advantage plan, sometimes called Part C. Or your HSAs, et cetera. This is for when you need care that you can no longer provide for yourself. This is not your regular health care and is not covered by Medicare. And so long-term care, it's a very high probability, over 65% chance you will utilize it in your lifetime. If you're married, the surviving spouse, once we lose a spouse, that number goes up north of 85% because typically one spouse will try to care for the other one if possible while both are alive. But the reality is once we lose the first spouse, the second one is not going to have the caregiver built in, right? So they're absolutely most likely going to need it. And so those expenses can get quite expensive. We briefly talked about with Colin earlier. The low end of the care is about $4,000 a month, and the high end could be $14,000 a month. That can get very expensive. And so you can protect yourself a myriad of ways. You can try and self-insure. You can buy traditional long-term care insurance that will give you a benefit amount allowed per day. You can buy hybrid policies, which is actually the preferred way we typically do it today because it's much less expensive. You can even get additional, sometimes free riders on life insurance where you can access your death benefit tax-free and risk-free if you qualify under certain qualifying events. In other words, and this may be available on life insurance you already have today. We can simply call and find out if there's a rider available. You don't know what you don't know. I say it all the time, but there are so many things that have to be covered in here. But Ed, yes, this is something we cover in our process. And when people come and meet with us and sign up, that first year, there's typically 4 to 5, sometimes 6 meetings in the first year onboarding with our firm, going through our smart planning process. And so we can't tackle this all in meeting 1 or meeting 2. And so we have a system in place. So this is addressed typically at what we call our 6-month strategy session or our first annual tactical review. We have to address it and get it covered, but it's all part of the overall process. Again, great question, Ed. And again, we do cover some of this at that very class we're having this very week on the ABCs of Medicare. It's briefly touched on.
Again, that's Wednesday, September 14th, or Thursday, September 15th. It's the same class each night. Pick the night that's most convenient for you. 6:30 p.m. It's right here at Retire Smart in the Midwest Learning Center, 402-369-7777. We do need you to call and register, 402-369-7777. We need to make sure we have room for everybody. All right, let's get Chet's question in here, David. He says, my wife and I are in our mid-70s and retired. We think our situation is relatively stable and secure, but I read an article recently about hidden fees in retirement accounts. It made me realize that we have no idea what fees we might be paying. Is it a common thing to ask for an audit or some kind of review of the fees we are paying in our various retirement accounts?
Absolutely, and we are very fee conscious, but the first thing you must understand is there's no free lunch, right? It costs money to invest. And sometimes people will come in here for some of the tax-specific planning things that we can do for them, but they're what we call DIYers, do-it-yourselfers, and they believe that, wow, I'm not paying anybody to do this, et cetera. And they end up paying way more than they realize they are paying. But to Chet's question, there are different types of retirement accounts, and he just says retirement accounts in general. So there are a lot of different type of accounts that could be called a retirement account. So yeah, there could be a lot of fees hidden in a lot of different places. So if it's a workplace account, such as a 401k or 403b, they have what's called TPA fees. These are record-keeping fees. Like they are required to be disclosed to you now by law, but they're usually going to be buried in the PDF somewhere on about page 74 of the plan documents if you, in fact, request them, but you are, in fact, paying them. And then there's going to be fees for the cost of the investments inside the account. And this is where both DIYers and people in workplace accounts get really hit with not only fees, Chip. There's both disclosed fees and undisclosed fees, but then there's also taxes paid in retirement accounts, and people don't realize it in their IRA or their 401k. Wait a minute. What do you mean I paid taxes on that? Yep. Last year was one of the worst years on record for capital gains distributions within the most popular vehicle used in these accounts, mutual funds. And some people had no idea. We recently had somebody come in. They had about $1.2 million in one of those retirement accounts, and they paid over $48,000 in capital gains distributions in that account. They lost that value in their account. And no one pointed this out to them. Again, we call it a phantom tax. You don't know what you don't know. You'd be a great candidate to get a portfolio review, and we do a fee review as part of our complete report card for you, Chet, if you'd like. Give us a call now, or just schedule one of those 15-minute phone calls so we can explain specifically what type of accounts you have and where those hidden fees may lie.
Speaking of those 15-minute phone calls, David, how many of those do we have this week?
We have 6 of those available.
402-369-7777. You have a question about retirement? No charge, no obligation. We'd be glad to answer it for you. 402-369-7777. Up next, Chip doesn't have the right tease. Let's see, Jerry. Up next, a Democrat wants to abolish the tax on Social Security? We'll tell you about it next on Retire Smart with David Brooks. Welcome back to Retire Smart with David Brooks. I'm Chip Maxwell. David, I know you're a fan of workers in the workplace, the connectivity, the synergy, face-to-face contact. Well, you have a soulmate. Here's a headline from Fox Business. CEO Ann Mukherjee on Back to Office idea. Workers must return with purpose. She is with a holding company that owns Jameson whiskey and a lot of other spirits and distilleries and so forth. And I think she's on your wavelength, David, that really it's time for people to come back, and there's just no substitute for the mojo that you get in the workplace working together.
Listen, they've tried to produce studies saying, productivity's gone up when remote workers, yet all the major companies have done self-study. Now, they're careful to publish this because it's not popular with where a lot of these big companies, in particular tech companies, don't want to publish the studies they've done. But your leading companies, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Apple, are calling everyone back to the office. And even Elon Musk was like, look, show up and work for real, or you can go pretend to work for someone else, right? The reality is there is a lot of productivity lost, and it's that interconnectivity we're talking about, what I call the water cooler innovation, right? We walk down the hall, hey, Chip, I got an idea, I want to talk to you about it. But if we don't have a scheduled Zoom meeting or Teams meeting or Slack or whatever technology the company's using to intercommunicate, we're not going to have that conversation in passing.
That organic, spontaneous
and not only that,
ideas.
we lose the idea, and it may be 6 months before the idea comes back up and the productivity that could have resulted from said idea. So, I think CEOs are starting to see the writing on the wall, and they're starting to kind of softly yell at people, if you will, it's time to get back here. And so they're trying to give people this facade, if you will, that it's going to be a hybrid. Here at Retire Smart, no, we work at work. Now, my flexible, somebody is partially sick, but they feel strong if they could work from home that day. We provide laptops. We'll let them do it instead of taking a sick day. But that is not going to be the norm. We're not doing this, you can work 2 days at home and 3 days at work. No, not for me. Sorry. I'm pretty stout about my opinions on certain things, you may tell. But other companies are coming to my line of sight, if you will, and having the same realization that you lose productivity drastically if people are not in the office together. We do have a couple of remote workers. Now, one of them used to work here in the office with us, and spouse or significant other got relocated, worked for the military, and so we wanted to not hurt her, and we ended up keeping her on board full time. At first it wasn't going to be that way, and we worked it out, and now she's doing a pretty good job working productivity from afar. But that is an exception to the rule, not the rule. And not only even that, we have to fly her in every so often here to get her face to face with employees, because as fast as we're growing, some of the employees she's kind of overseeing have never even met her, and I'm like, we can't have that. I mean, we've hired, Chip, just in the last 12 months. HR was just telling me this, 24 people in the last year since we moved in the new space. I'm like, what? And I'm like realizing. So it's important, I think, for the camaraderie, for culture at work, for people to work at work, no matter how big or small the company is. And I'm adamant that's the only way I will run companies going forward.
David, here's the story we teased going into the last break, and it's from 401 Specialist magazine. And you flagged this one, and I chuckled when I saw it, knowing how you feel about taxes on Social Security. So here's the headline. New bill seeks to abolish tax on Social Security benefits. This is coming out of Congress. This is at the federal level. This is a Democrat from Minnesota who is proposing this. Now, you always say, you joke and say, well, generally I vote with my right hand. But when really pressed, your bottom line is, your bedrock position is, I care about policy. not party. If you've got the right policy, I don't really care what party you are. So this is good news, is it not, David?
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm agreeing with her. Now, to pay for this, just so you understand, she's doing something that's most likely going to have to be done, is she's going to raise the cap on the wages that would pay in to the system.
So Uncle Sam is going to find a way to get some more revenue to compensate.
So basically, today payroll is taxed about $147,000. That's where in other words, if you make over $147,000 a year, that's when we stop taxing you for the portion that goes in to fund Social Security. She's intending to raise that cap all the way up to $250,000. That's a pretty big jump, but again, that is a fair way to tax because it's only taxing those that earn above those numbers. It's not going to be burdensome to the lower income earners. So, and I'm one of those such people that would have to pay an additional tax. However, if the trade-off is when I get to 70 and I'm taking Social Security and I don't have to pay federal taxes on it, I'm all for it. Let's do it because I do believe, unfortunately, most people do not have the resources that I've been able to acquire in my lifetime, and that Social Security is the primary income source for almost 2/3 of retirees, Chip. And if they didn't have to pay tax on it, and folks, you never did in the beginning, all right? And a lot of people forget our conservative man, the Gipper, Ronald Reagan is the one that actually created tax on Social Security. That was the trade-off to get our income tax from 70% all the way down to 28% in 1983, but we started taxing Social Security. And just so you know, basically over 50% of your Social Security is going to be taxable in the taxable bucket if your income is at one threshold, and if it goes a little higher, then it's up to 85% can currently get taxed. And this creates double taxation for people with CD interest, etc. So it can be a real problem. So I'm all behind her for this, and hopefully she gets some bipartisan support on it. Now, maybe they'll do a scale up on those wages, you know what I mean? And so just instead of going straight to $250,000, hey, we're going to go to 175, then a 200, and then 225, and then 250 or something and scale it up. And I think that may be appropriate.
David, in the time we have left, there's a historian, he's Scottish. He's very well known in the UK and in the United States. He's been at Stanford. He's been at Harvard. He's a historian with an emphasis on financial matters and how they affect history. His name is Neil Ferguson. And CNBC did a story on Ferguson. The headline is, quoting Ferguson saying, "Why shouldn't it be as bad as the 1970s? Historian Neil Ferguson has a warning for investors." David, do you see things the same way Ferguson does?
I see some things the same way. I don't see everything the same. There's a lot that's different today than it was in 1970s. And so what he's referring to is we had a war going on that everybody thought would be short and stretched out. The Ukraine war now is stretching out much longer than anyone anticipated. At the time, he's talking about you had basically what they refer to as the Yom Kippur War, which was basically an Arab invasion of Israel, correct?
1973,
yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so that was a short war. But it created energy problems and pricing in energy. And so he's reflecting on that to today, where you have Russian energy, which is a lot in the news right now. In fact, they've cut off the Nord Stream pipeline this week, completely cut off Europe from energy sources, and that's creating problems. And you had higher inflationary problems, right? And you had monetary mistakes made by the central banks around the globe. Well, he points out that those same mistakes are being made again, and the Federal Reserve here in the U.S. way behind them. I mean, we talked about they should have been raising interest rates, Chip, a year and a half ago. They should have been moving consistently, and now because they didn't, they have to move awfully aggressive. And this coming up week, you're going to see them move probably 3/4 of a point or more again in interest rates, and it's going to create economic hardship and pain. And again, for the first time in history, we had the leader of our Federal Reserve Bank, Jerome Powell, use the word pain in his speech at Jackson Hole a couple of weeks ago, and he's going to cause pain to the American small business owner, and he's going to cause pain to the homeowner and our economy in general, because they are committed, at least they say they are, to fight inflation. And unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of economic damage, and that's what he's pointing out. And what's scary about his reference to the 70s, folks, is we didn't go through a recession. We went through stagflation. And I've talked about it many times. I would much rather go through a nice, deep, quick recession than stagflation any day.
Define that for us, David. Stagflation.
So a recession is where we go negative on our growth, and it would happen for up to a year and a half. Typically, recessions last about 14 months, actually, on average. So we would go through some negative growth, but we would swing back out of it, and we'd see economic growth spur again. Stagflation, we're going to go through this prolonged period of time where we have no growth, but we still have habitually high inflation. And inflation most likely has peaked. That's the good news. The bad news is the sticky inflation they waited too long to act has now stuck, and it's going to take years to work this off. We anticipate our model right now, you're going to have year-end inflation somewhere between 6.6 and 7.2%. That's still pretty high inflation with the Fed hiking as aggressive as they are this year, and inflation's not going to get to that 2% target they talk about for 5 or 6 years at best. And so that's going to create havoc. And if they don't act more aggressively, we'll end up in this 3 to 5 year malaise of no economic growth, with people having to spend a higher percentage every week on more goods and services just to survive. And we're already seeing the bottom fifth of our income earners, the bottom quintile, having to spend 112% of their weekly wages to get by. And they're putting that on credit, and that's, of course, going to run out as well.
What all of this means is you cannot afford to be on automatic pilot. Let's take a survey of what we offer for you. We've got the SMART Checklist. That's an inventory. That's a great way to get started, the complimentary SMART Checklist. You want to dip a toe in the water? Schedule a 15-minute phone call with one of our licensed financial advisors. Or go ahead and take the plunge. Get the report card, the complimentary report card, comprehensive review of your entire financial situation. And don't forget, we have 2 workshops coming up this week. We've got the ABCs of Medicare, Wednesday, September 4th, or Thursday, September 15th, 6:30 in the evening, right here at Retire Smart, the Midwest Learning Center. And then Wednesday, September 28th, Thursday, September 29th, Estate Planning 101 with Colin Kastrick. You heard Colin earlier on the show. That also, 6:30, right here at the Midwest Learning Center at Retire Smart. 402-369-7777 for any or all of those. 402-369-7777. David, bring us home.
Hey, it's beautiful weather. Enjoy this beautiful fall weather while it's here. But listen, don't hesitate. If you get waitlisted in any of those classes, we will get you in the next one coming up. We've got several classes between now and the end of the year. Have a blessed and prosperous week.
Thank you for listening to Retire Smart with David Brooks. I'm Chip Maxwell. For David Brooks and the entire team at Retire Smart, have a great week.